All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our midday masterclass. It's great to see all of you here. My name is Zabina Ofori, and I'm the Social Impact Manager at MAP. And before I hand back to Tim, who's going to introduce our facilitator. I'm going to do the acknowledgement of country. I'm currently on the beautiful Wurundjeri land on this crisp, wintry day in Melbourne. And because this is a virtual event and we're across at least 3 cities, Melbourne, Perth, and Los Angeles, I'd like to ask you to reflect on the traditional land that you're on and to share where you're dialing in from using the chat. So when we talk about the need for entrepreneurs to have vision, creativity, and resilience, and to build companies that are good for people and the planet, it's hard to think of a better example and inspiration for the future of business than the sovereign First Nations people of this country, and those in Australia and also in the United States. And it's with that sentiment that I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm on today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And if there are any First Nations people here with us today, I'd like to extend that respect to you too. I'm excited that we're putting on this event today in collaboration with the City of Melbourne to highlight the incredible achievements of creative tech founders Hannah Donovan, Ivan Novacco, and Gemma, who you'll hear from in a few minutes. The City of Melbourne's music division really wants to support more startup founders who are working with the sound and music medium, and they're sponsoring a place in our pre-accelerator program, Velocity. Applications for Velocity are now open, and it's a perfect opportunity for high potential early stage founders to find their first customers. If you're curious about the program, please head to our website, themap.co, and you can sign up to our Ask Me Anything session, which is happening tomorrow afternoon. All right, that's all for me. I'm going to hand back to you, Tim.
Thanks, Sabina. Thanks for that terrific introduction, and great to see some people in the chat acknowledging the lands that they're on as well. So wonderful to see that. So thanks, Sabina. Look, before I hand over to the panel, one last little piece of housekeeping in relation to exactly what Sabina was talking about there. Can I see a show of hands of people that are working on a startup, early stage, and are interested in learning some things as a result of that? Anyone working on a startup in the audience? See a few hands. Lovely stuff. I'm tracking through the different screens here, and that's really good. Some people using the thumbs, the Zoom thing, that's awesome as well. Now, I hesitate to ask this, but I'm really excited to see, is there anyone that's working on what they would consider a music tech or entertainment tech startup? Any less hands? Well, yes. I saw at least 3 or 4, so that's awesome. So hope you've got some questions for the panel today, and great to see you here. So look, that's about it. I'm going to post the Slido link one more time so everybody has that, because we've got a wonderful waterfall of introductions happening in the chat, and that makes my heart sing, I'm going to be honest. So great to see that, and I'm going to hand over to Sophie, who is no better position to moderate this talk. So Sophie is the General Manager of Arts House at the City of Melbourne, a premier arts venue in Melbourne that curates and programs some incredible work that comes from Melbourne. Sophie has a very interesting background herself as well, working all over the world. So I'll allow Sophie to elaborate a little bit on that, and then she'll hand over to introduce the rest of the panel. So thanks again for being here. Enjoy the event, and look to have some questions from you in about 40 minutes time. Thanks, Sophie.
Thanks, Tim, and hello, everybody. I'm joining you from the land of the Wurundjeri and the Boonwurrung people here in chilly Melbourne. I'm a settler here, of Scottish and Danish descent, and I pay my respects to the custodians of the land, to elders past, present, and to all Aboriginal people here with us today. It's a wonderful privilege for me to be here. As Tim said, I'm working for the City of Melbourne, which is very engaged with innovation and creativity. There's a range of programs there, not least the music plan, which is working with MAP, but also I think there's some colleagues here from Smart City dealing a lot with the startup scene, from Melbourne Knowledge Week, very engaged with the ideas in the city. And myself, I'm in a branch called Creative City, which is the arts and the libraries. And in my daily life, I deal principally with artists. I'm working in the world of subsidized arts, and that's not an easy. It's not an easy moment at the moment to be an artist, and we're facing a lot of challenges. And so it's particularly inspiring for me today to get involved with something like this, where yes, it's all about creativity, but it's looking for new opportunities and new resources and maybe a way out of this moment that we're in, which is very hard. So it's been a great pleasure to research the businesses that we're talking to today, to be inspired by these three women and their journeys. And I'm very much looking forward to the sort of tips and insights and encouragement that they'll give us when they talk about their journeys. As Tim said, we're going to take your questions as we go along. I will be talking to each founder in turn, starting with just giving them the space to talk us through what they're working on, but then maybe just with a few starter questions to get the conversation flowing, but really leaving a good chunk of time at the end to take your questions. So do keep those coming via the Slido, as Tim says. I'll periodically give you a little reminder to do that, but I'm really hoping that the debate is coming from you all here today. So without further ado, I'm going to start with Gemma. Gemma's going to start off by telling us a bit about AudioPlay, her business. And then, as I said, I'll just ask a couple of questions. Gemma, thanks for joining us today, and tell us where you're at. Tell us a bit about AudioPlay, how you got to where you are now, and if you have a bit of a chance to lay out where you're headed.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm joining everyone from the Wajak Noongar lands, and so I'd like to pay my respects to the custodians of the lands here in Perth. So yes, AudioPlay is the business that we've been working on for quite some time now. And essentially it's a response to families looking for entertainment options that don't revolve around screens. So there's a lot of tensions in families around how much time kids spend on screens and kind of what that does both to their development as humans, but also kind of just the dynamics, the social dynamics in the family, and what that means when kids are properly glued to screens for hours on end, which, you know, particularly in COVID times has become even more of an issue where, you know, you can't leave the house, so what are you going to do? So AudioPlay uses audio as a tool to explore new forms of creative play and new forms of storytelling. And we create experiences that kids really love and that parents can kind of appreciate new ways of entertainment that also have a range of other benefits as well. So it's kind of old school make-believe fun, but with an amazing blockbuster soundtrack to go with it. So essentially kids put on headphones and then they step into the story and they become a character in the story. But they physically play out the action in real life. So they might use cushions and blankets and chairs and that kind of stuff in the living room, real life objects. But we overlay a soundtrack and we overlay audio for them as a character playing in the story. So we kind of help their imaginative process and kind of give it a new audio backdrop, essentially, and a driver to tell stories, but they're physically acting out the story. So I might just try and show a couple of pics just to give you an idea of what that looks like through screen share. So hopefully that's working. So yeah, kids might, to give you a sense of it, so kids might be told something like, oh my God, the vultures are circling, quick, take cover. So they would be physically diving under a chair or hiding under a blanket. And they're also hearing a full filmic score. So all of the emotional drivers that you might get when you're watching a movie, as well as all the sound effects of birds circling and those elements that really heighten the imagination. but we're giving them an avenue to physically engage with that story and be part of it, kind of thing. So with AudioPlay, there's a couple of specific things that kind of set it apart from, say, podcasts and audiobooks. The first being that it is highly physical. So kids physically playing out the story in the real world, sort of augmented with audio. And that helps them to physically build that imaginary world. The other element that is very distinct is that each player hears the story from the perspective of their character. So each player is hearing the story from a different perspective. And so it kind of means there's no goodies and baddies. There's no kind of binary in the storytelling. Children can play the same story multiple times and come to understand points of conflict from different perspectives. So it makes it very, very much less about good versus evil, right and wrong, more about there being multiple perspectives on any point of conflict and what does that mean, which is quite an interesting space creatively around how we understand stories. The technology behind AudioPlay is being patented as well, which is a kind of interesting / boring protracted process. So it's kind of interesting in a creative space to be able to get to a point where we've got technology that's patentable. But obviously, if anyone's interested in that, then I'd be happy to talk about it. The team behind AudioPlay is myself and my sister Zoe and our app developer Ari. And Zoe and I both come from a theatre and festival background. So I've spent 20 years doing large-scale events, touring theatre. And so stepping into the tech world is a very different space for us. Our focus is very much on telling really great stories and creating transformative experiences for audiences. And the AudioPlay technology has evolved out of a theatre show. So several years ago, we did a show called The Confidence Man, which people in Melbourne may have seen, that premiered at Arts House. And over a number of years, we've kind of taken what was a theatre show and taken the mechanics of that and kind of distilled it down into creating an experience that families can download and play at home. Which for us was really interesting in terms of stepping out of the traditional framework of a theatre where you have to have a booking and it's specific dates and it's specific times that audiences have to be there, and then taking the core of that experience and making it so that families can download it and play it anytime they like in their homes. And the first series that we've got up at the moment is The Turners, which is based on a book trilogy by Australian author Mick Elliott. And we're currently in a process of kind of expanding our catalogue of content, which in and of itself is kind of an interesting challenge in that we can't repurpose existing content. We can't take existing video or audio books. The nature of our experiences means that all of our content has to be bespoke and kind of written for multiple characters. So it's quite an interesting challenge for us as to how do we build out that library of content? How do we bring other creatives into the space? And also creatively, how do we continue to evolve the form and try what works in response to what do families need and how do kids engage with these stories, and how does it function in the home so that it's accessible? It's been an interesting process, so many interesting elements, in looking at particularly the family entertainment market, which is a very crowded space. There's a lot of activities that kids can engage with and do. And so kind of how you cut through everything that's on offer, how do you get your message out there, has been, well, it continues to be an evolving challenge for us as to how you understand that. And also another biggie being that in a family context, our users are children, but our customers are adults. And so how do we manage the messaging around that, particularly for 6 to 12-year-olds, where those kids are very savvy. They're the leaders in what kind of entertainment they consume, but they also don't have social media. So it's kind of like, how do we engage with both sides of that equation to connect with kids and get them to try AudioPlay, and then from there, discover what this weird new experience is that's not quite Minecraft and it's not quite Fortnite. I guess one other element that I thought it might be worth to talk about in this forum was kind of how we got here, because it's a very different space from going from producing a theatre show or producing a large scale event to, okay, let's make an app and let's try and distribute it in a range of countries. So for us, we moved from an arts-based process, which is much more kind of slow moving and iterative and kind of exploring creative ideas, to slowly kind of going, okay, no, this is a real business. Let's focus on this. How do we turn it into a product that you can sell to customers, which, those are quite foreign terms in an arts context. And we did sort of spend quite a bit of time essentially chasing our own tails and kind of going around in circles, trying to figure out what are the problems that we're trying to solve, and then solving them, and then deciding that we solved it the wrong way and we needed to do it a different way. So one of the really key moments for us was being accepted into the Acme Accelerator Program. So we were part of the second cohort, and I can see in the room today, there's a few people who have also been through that program. So that was a 3-month program, which was run out of Acme, and they brought in really amazing business coaches and mentors, and gave us exposure to a whole range of different people with interests and skills in the creative industries. But that was really pivotal for us in terms of really getting down into the nuts and bolts of how you shift your headspace to be sitting in that entrepreneurial space, and really engaging kind of lean methodology and building tests, and really interrogating what it is that your product is, to get down to the hub of how to make it function as a business and how to refine the product. So that was fantastic. We've also spent a fair bit of time essentially benchmarking internationally to see who else is out there and who else is doing this kind of work. So going to South by Southwest and like competing in the Creative Business Cup in Copenhagen, and a range of those kind of, and off the back of those trips, doing a lot of international networking to kind of scope out what partnerships might be available, and also just understand the landscape, which has been really useful for us, and particularly coming from Australia, where you can feel so far away, and connection to other markets can feel kind of distant and slightly aspirational. So to be able to go and do that, to connect with those other industries, has been really useful. And we also ended up participating in the Sound Tech Accelerator Program, which is run out of Sound Hub Denmark, which is a partnership. They've got partners with Bang & Olufsen and Harman International, which is a subsidiary of Samsung. So essentially working out of Sound Hub to build connections through Europe, and kind of have support in terms of developing the business, and building new partnerships and that kind of stuff. So those programs for us have been really important in terms of really refining what it is that we do. It's one thing to have a really big vision of how amazing it's all going to be. It's another thing to actually put in place the building blocks of actually getting somewhere and building that. And we've I feel like we've come a really long way, but at the same time, we're still very much at the early stages, and we're still kind of refining, refining a number of things around how we connect with our audiences and grow our audiences. But at the same time, it's a pretty wild ride, and you learn a hell of a lot. So it's been fantastic, and we've really enjoyed it. So
thanks, Gemma.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic overview. There's
Good.
a lot of detail there. I hope everybody was paying attention. I can see the chats going off, so that's great. Just circling right back to the beginning of your positioning of the whole project, you're coming from the arts world, and you've gone really right there into these very complex mechanisms for supporting a startup. For people who are joining us today, who are at the beginning of that journey and are potentially artists or coming fresh to the startup environment, have you got any sort of tips or guidance there about stepping into that new world? Anything you can say to encourage? It could be a little bit intimidating, some of the things you're talking about, going to Denmark, the accelerators. How have you managed that?
Yeah, I mean, those things don't happen overnight either, and it's kind of, I think it's a lot of it is just sort of being open to new ways of thinking, and kind of, particularly when you've come from arts and subsidized sector, there's kind of a landscape that you come to understand around how subsidy works and how partnerships work and how you sell a show, or how you book a gig, those kind of things. And so I think it's just having a willingness to kind of step back from that and be open to a new way of working, which to begin with can be quite granular. It can be just like, who exactly is your customer base and what is the problem that you're solving? Which we really wrestled with that. What is the problem that you're solving? Because as artists, you don't solve a problem. You create new opportunities. You create new ways to see the world. And, you know, there's certainly a space for that, but also in terms of more quickly building a business, having a problem means that people are more likely to actually put their hand in their pocket and pay for the solution that you're offering. So for us, it's kind of essentially holding those two realities in our heads, and kind of allowing space for, yes, in a way it's art, and it is about creating a new way of seeing the world, and all of the artists that we engage to create new content, that's how they operate. And really we need that wonder in order for our content to really sing. But on the flip side, at a business level, you also need to understand the nuts and bolts of kind of how businesses work. And so being open to both spaces and not necessarily closing one down, because there's a whole world of learning that comes from that. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Gemma. That's really a lot of insight and detail there. I think we'll go on to Hannah now because of our time constraints. Hannah, you're deep in the world of the startup scene over there in LA. So you can really talk to us, I think, with the kind of insights that we don't have so readily to hand here in Australia. It would be wonderful to hear about Trash, your current project, but I think also just some of the experience from your rich past would be great to touch on as well.
Yeah, sure. Happy to share those things. So I'll just share a quick overview of my journey into tech. I actually started on the creative side of things. So I went to school for design, and originally I thought that I actually wanted to do fine arts, but quickly decided that design was going to be a better path for me personally. And I think I made the right decision. I'm quite a technical person, analytical, but also very creative. And so design really blends those two worlds for me. And when I graduated, I got a job working at a design agency, like working my way up the ladder, like as you would. But I was really lucky that at the time, the internet was just starting to really happen and explode. And like, this was sort of the early 2000s. And so as a very curious person, I just was really interested in learning how to code. And the moment for me where it like really clicked, like, oh, this is an amazing thing to do, is when I realized I didn't need like a printer or a manufacturer or anybody to help put my designs into the world. I could just like press a button and like it would be out there. So that was really the siren song of the web for me. And I got deep into making websites like right out of college. And then from there, I was really lucky to go land my first big job in tech working for a company called Last.fm, which was a big music recommendation service and internet radio station based out of London. And so I spent like 6 years working at Last.fm and did all the things. We went through a huge acquisition. It was an absolute roller coaster. I led the design team there. I PM'd many features to market, and it was literally just like learning by doing. Like everything that was coming at me had never been done before. Nobody had ever used music information retrieval to make collaborative filtering. They'd never done those kinds of recommendations. They'd never built those kinds of teams. So it was a lot of just like trial by fire. And I think there were points along that journey where, as like a deeply rooted creative person, I was like, wow, how did I get myself into such a super technical zone? But because it really was not just like building digital products, but inventing new technology. And I think there's a big difference between those two things when we talk about the field of tech. And so I discovered I actually love it, and I love science, and I love working in frontier tech, and I love working with collaborating with engineers and scientists that are actually like creating new things. After that, I started my own company in music called This Is My Jam, which is about sharing your favorite song right now. So not just any music, but like the one that you have on repeat, the song that I'm sure you can all do it right now. Like, what's the song that you've been playing over and over this month? And then that was a really cool project to do. I made a lot of mistakes. I also learned from them. It was great to like get that under my belt as a founder early on. And that was actually spun out of the Echo Nest. I was working for them doing some R&D, and the Echo Nest later got acquired by Spotify, and they power all of the Discover Weekly and like all of the recommendations that you would get from your Spotify playlist. So I spent like about 10 years working deeply in the music recommendation space. And then after that, music was kind of becoming a bit of a, like, I say this in air quotes because I know some of you are working on music, but like solved problem on the internet from the perspective of streaming and recommendations. Like there was a big problem, which is like, I want to press that button and hear the song. And that problem had been kind of solved by like about 2013 or 14. So I went into the field of video, which is also one of my first loves. I was like making a lot of video on like Hi8 and like VHS when I was a kid, and I'm also a musician. So these things are really related for me. And I think especially going from audio into video, it like forces you to think about audio first, which is actually super important for video. For any of you filmmakers in the audience, you know that it's often more important than what you're looking at. And so I at that point I moved to New York City. I'm actually originally from Canada, but I've moved around a lot over my entire life and career. And so moved to New York City, spent some time working at MTV, building new digital experiences there, and then went back into the startup world to go work for this company called Drip, which got acquired by Kickstarter. And that was sort of more working with creators and really understanding the independent creator experience online today. How do you really activate fans to be able to make a living? And then from there, I went to go work at Vine, where I was the general manager. And so I worked at Twitter. And that was a pretty interesting job. I'm sure you all know what happened to Vine in the end. Unfortunately, Twitter shut it down, but I did some really cool work there and made a lot of interesting things happen. And I was also responsible for making sure that we archived all of that, like 3.5 years of pop art that otherwise I don't know what would have happened to. So that was me. I made sure to stay there till the bitter end to make sure that all of that culture was taken care of, and also ship the Vine camera for creators so that they still had this tool to use even if they didn't have the platform, which was really important to me to ensure that people that did like stop motion animation, other types of creative work, who are really using that like shoot in like different scenes, the way the Vine camera works, like had access to that. So after that, you can imagine the state I was in. I think I was a little bit broken in spirit, honestly, after working on such a really intense project. And I think for me, the only thing that revives me again is leaning back into my creativity and my intuition and my curiosity. And so from that moment, I had been really curious about the fact that it was actually still very difficult for people to make videos with Trash, or with Vine rather. And so that was really what spurred the idea for Trash. And so with Trash, what we do is we help you make a video by using artificial intelligence. So this was like really leaning on a lot of the machine learning stuff that I'd done at Last.fm, we use computer vision to like look at the video clips that you want to edit together and then use that science to create a rough cut for you, so that from there you can just dive in and start editing and playing with it. And what it does is it like reduces that barrier to entry. It like eliminates the blank canvas problem, like the dreaded like, where do I start? And for a lot of people who are intimidated by video or feel like they don't have the technical knowledge to be able to do it, or just want a faster solution, it works super well for them. And so we launched on the App Store at the end of last year, and we've seen some like really nice success. We got an App Store feature. We just did like a big Snapchat integration. A lot of our users are like very young, so Snapchat is a really big channel for us. And we had like our best day with that integration since we did the App Store feature. And so that's what I do now. I lead the team at Trash. I'm the founder and CEO. It's a very design-led, science-forward company. We really look at combining art and science for what we do. And you can all go check it out if you have an iPhone on the App Store. And I think that's like, I think that probably suffices in terms of giving you my journey. I've been all over the place. But today I'm talking to you from Los Angeles, and to do the homework for today, I'm coming from the original land of the Gabrielle Edna people.
Oh, thank you, Hannah. That is quite
You're
a
welcome.
journey. Dizzying. Yeah, really interesting to look into Hannah's background. You do a good job of documenting that on podcasts and websites. I've had a good time looking into all of that and doing a lot of learning myself. I encourage everybody to take a look there. Hannah, did you see this coming? Because Trash is a consumer mobile app that is just perfect for this moment of sitting at home with nowhere to go. You seem to be very prescient there with launching that last year like you did.
Yeah, maybe. I think like on one hand, yeah, it is kind of perfect for this moment, especially for musicians. And so we launched our Trash for Artists feature at the end of March or beginning of April. We were supposed to launch it at South by, but obviously we did not go. And so that was great because people like artists right now really need ways to connect with their fans, and they're all trying to figure out video, whether it's live streaming or like posting video or whatever it might be. And so we give independent musicians who may not have the budget to be able to make a full-fledged music video with a whole crew, the ability to do it on their own, on their phone. And the outcome is actually really nice. And that was like a really cool thing to be able to ship during the pandemic when we were sort of in like the thick of lockdown here in the US. So we're actually back in it again. So we'll see. But I do think it's also like an interesting problem because there's like less footage. Like I see people trashing like a lot of their old stuff, a lot of memories, like a lot of candid stuff from before the pandemic, I think almost in a bit of a nostalgic way right now. And that's a really interesting behavior and trend that I wonder what we'll see when this is all over. But to answer your question about being prescient, I do think for any of you listening, like if you spend a long enough time working in a specific field like I have, you do start to be able to see what's coming up next before other people. And on one hand, it's a really cool feeling. On the other hand, it's really frustrating because nobody will believe you. They're all gonna think that you're absolutely crazy talking about this thing that doesn't exist yet. And then like 5 years later, they'll be like, oh my God, that conversation we had, you were so right. That's happened to me lots of times. When I was pitching Trash, I pitched it to an investor who said, I don't think that short form video will ever be a big thing, especially not if it's associated with music. The market just is not large enough. Mm-hmm. So there you go. Direct quote from like 2015, pre-TikTok.
Well, that's enjoyable now, isn't it, to look back on that? I wonder where that person is. Interesting what you say about the present moment, because I think, Gemma, that's the same for you, isn't it? This suddenly the behaviors of your consumers are really changing due to COVID, and how you adapt to those is, potentially an advantage, having this literally captive audience to work with suddenly. But it does require a lot of thinking around changing your direction, the dreaded pivot word that we all have to think about suddenly. Hannah, just before we finish with you, because I think there'll be lots of questions, just in terms of that journey, I personally am very interested in stamina and resilience. Like that's a lot of stuff to go through, exits, acquisitions, how do you keep going through all of that?
I don't know. I have a lot of energy. So I think just like naturally, like I'm a very driven, like go, go, go kind of person. It has been a lot, and there wasn't a lot of downtime in between any of those things either, because I was almost always an immigrant, and you usually don't get a chance to stop working as an immigrant because you constantly have to prove to the government that you can make money and you're not taking resources from other people. So like even after Last FM, after I cashed out, I still had to like get back to work right away. Otherwise I would have had to like leave the UK. So yeah, there wasn't a lot of downtime in between. I think I find like a lot of ways to keep going in terms of routine. That's super important to me. My friends, I like have a really wide network of people that I know believe in what I do and encourage me and I can turn to when things get rough. And also like having like creative side projects. And a big one for me has been public speaking. So I've done a lot of that throughout the last decade, and that's been a really cool way to see part of the world. I've actually been to Australia twice to speak there, which has been really cool. Spoken at Web Direction Sydney 2 times, and also visited Melbourne and a few other places. Went up north as well, did some diving. So that was like those types of things. I think like finding ways to like put your creative energy into side projects or like passion hobbies that can give you some reward in between all of the like grind is a great way to do it.
Thank you. That's really encouraging, because I think for all of us, it's a tough moment, and especially a tough moment to be starting new enterprises and optimistic, positive thinking. So thank you for that. I'm going to hand over now to Ivy to talk to us a bit about Sleigh Group. Hi, Ivy. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me. My name is Ivy Novacco. I'm co-founder and CEO of Sleigh Group. The journey of Sleigh Group started more than 20 years ago when my brother and I were in our teens, and we were working in the media and entertainment industry as voice actors. So we were the people who were attending those open casting calls and struggling with 400, 500 other people to just get a spot and be seen by the producers. And I learned a lot of lessons about the entertainment industry in my time there. Mostly that you will be typecast. As a voice actress, I was always the princess, or I was always the pretty thing to the side that people aspire to save. Or when I'm actually performing in front of people, I was the evil stepsister because, my looks. Anyway, so I didn't like that. So I used the money I earned in media, and I just used it to put myself through uni. And I left and had a career in corporate. I was doing media content for like corporate learning and development. I was training and so on, and I was still in front of people, but it was my brain that people appreciated instead of my looks or my voice, which I appreciated greatly. Fast forward a few years, my brother who had stayed in the industry and had built a name for himself, he clawed his way up from voice actor, and he was producer now to a lot of large localization projects for international companies. And he was looking to build the next phase of his company. So as a person who had a background in business, but also understood all of the things that he struggles with on a day-to-day basis, we formed a partnership, and that's how Sleigh Group became an actual thing. We started in 2014 doing localization, that's doing the subs and the dubs for like Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, and other companies that I'm not allowed to say out loud because I'm under NDA. But we started there, and recently we branched out into doing more generalized staffing, so writers, producers, directors for the entertainment industry. what we're doing right now is we're creating technology to make this whole staffing and logistics for production work simpler, because it nearly killed us the last 4 years to balance the budget with the creative needs of the director, with the producer, with just making everybody happy. Because in a layered system like that, somebody drops the ball, and this has happened to me. One day we lost $26,000 because somebody didn't inform the actors that they were supposed to be in a particular location at a particular time. So that hurts, and that is actually something that happens even with the most professional cast and crew that you can find. So we were just building at the start Sleigh Group and this software solution to solve our problems. But as we had more conversations with our clients, with the studios that we were working with, they were saying, oh my God, yes, sign me up, take my money now. And we were saying, because I am a very, very, I don't like making mistakes. I only put the best product out there. I said, okay, let's just trial this a little bit. Let's go through an accelerator program, because I really don't know what this software thing is all about. Let's make sure we do it right, which led me to a map. We went through it in 2018, and they have been wonderful in their support. The mentors really drilled into my head how to survive in the challenging environment that Gemma and Hannah have prefaced for me. So now Sleigh has grown since 2018 when we went through MAP. We're not only creating a software for localization and for the localization production. What we're trying to do now is create an end-to-end solution for all of those intricate problems that we ourselves encountered, from being a starting artist to producing our own work. We're into looking at exploring alternative funding models and revenue sources, also looking at other distribution models for film and TV projects. This particularly last phase of our development is important to me as a person and me as a consumer, because traditionally the barrier to entry for minorities and women of color is extremely high. Opportunities to even begin building skills to enter our industry is not widely available. And it's really, you get the opportunity to work in the industry if you already know somebody in the industry. So people with authentic voices, with authentic stories to tell, that is not dictated by, let's not get too political, but you know who I'm talking about. They don't get endorsed because the gatekeepers will not allow it. So I said, because I am also extremely stubborn, I said, well, if you're not going to let me play in your playground, I'll create my own playground and have other people that have other points of view create something that will be in direct competition to you. And yeah, that's where we are now.
Thanks, Ivy. That's really inspiring. Wow. Good luck with that. It's great. I mean, we have 3 female founders here today, so we're obviously seeing that change is happening, and it's great to hear that you're taking that on. Do you think it's particular to the film industry that sort of barriers to access are particularly strong, or are you finding that across the startup landscape?
I think Gemma and Hannah already said something about it, but as a female woman of color immigrant in Australia, I am at the bottom of the totem pole, so I have to prove that my company is almost bulletproof to be able to get support and funding. And that's, I think, is something that's not endemic to the entertainment world. It's just that in the entertainment world, it's very pronounced. at the moment. And it's an opportunity because of all of that's happening right now. If we don't move at this particular time, when the focus is on that particular problem, then this problem will just be swept away when the next big thing happens. So there's sort of a time crunch here where I have to do this and I have to do this now.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I'm really interested in the tension between your perfectionism and constant change and movement.
Yeah, as an artist, I'm my own worst enemy because I always keep working on something, even though I should really just call it a day and submit it. I'm learning, but it's hard.
That's very interesting. I think we should probably go to questions from the floor now. I'm conscious of our time. So I'm hoping that people have been referring to the Slido. Tim has been posting that diligently in the chat to encourage you all to post questions and also to vote on each other's questions. I think, Tim, am I right in thinking that you've got a good number of questions there to look at?
Yeah, well, I do. We've got a few, and please keep posting them. But we've got a terrific one for, I think we'll go Gemma first, if that's okay, and then a really good one for Hannah. And they were around some of the things that we discussed prior to this event, which is great. So I'll just read it out. This one's from Anonymous, so I can't give them the floor, I'm afraid. But Gemma, the question was around your app. Did you raise money for it? Did you get grants? You know, did you get money from the Accelerator program that you talked through? Was it partnerships? How did you fund the development of your app?
So we haven't taken any VC or angel investment to date. All of our work has been subsidised through grants, and also doing the odd kind of larger scale corporate gig that's given us enough revenue to then reinvest that back into software development. And I guess also we've been quite cautious around staging the work and doing what we can within the budgets that we have available. So it probably means we've taken a lot longer than we probably should have. But at the same time, we're still totally in control of each of those steps of development.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Gemma. And did you, if you're comfortable sharing, were the accelerators programs, did they provided you with some funding? Did they take equity, or how did they work?
No, with both of those, there was no funding on the table, but also no equity taken. So I think more commonly in Australia, there's pockets of money that are offered up to just so that you've got some cash to work with to do stuff. But when we went through Acme, there was no grants available, but more like the support in and of itself was invaluable. And then similarly in Denmark, there's no equity taken. There's potential investment at the end of the program. They're first at the head of the queue when it comes to going into a seed round, but they don't take any equity at the beginning.
Thanks, Gemma. That's wonderful. And for Hannah, we've got a question from Leah. I might ask Leah, if she's still here, if she'd like to take off her microphone or mute and ask the question herself. It's around gaining users and followers. And if you wanted to talk a little bit about your funding for Trash App, I've got a couple of other people that are interested in that as well, Hannah. But I'll throw to Leah if you're in the room.
Yeah, hi Hannah. Great to meet you. It sounds like your journey's been massive and good for you for rolling your experience forward into something that can help people. Just with your Trash App, what's the main way that you're gaining users at the moment? And do you feel like with TikTok and the way that's taking off, and it's more like, I don't know, this challenging positioning where people are throwing it out to other people, almost like a battle off kind of thing, and that's sort of creating a sense of community. Are you looking at anything in regards to that, to the way that you're picking up users? Thanks.
Sure. So with consumer, the most important thing for gaining users is to find some kind of channel that works organically. You can kickstart that a little bit with some advertising, and like paid is a pretty common now for consumer, so that people like find out about your app. But finding a channel that really works is the most important thing. So if you think about like when Instagram started, for example, they had that really smart share panel, which said like also share it to Tumblr and Twitter and these other places. And then you would see that content on Twitter and you'd be like, oh, how do I get this thing? So that's like one of the sort of age-old tactics. So our channel that we've found works really well for us is Snapchat. It's because our users are really young. And also because what we're building is actually very different than TikTok. I think right now we're at a point where video is still quite new, that people tend to lump it all into one bucket. But actually the future means that like we're all going to be communicating in video on different platforms in different ways, short form, long form, like in the moment, AI based, not AI, like you name it. And so TikTok is one type of expression, which is like what I would squarely call an entertainment network. It's not really a social network. It's more of a place where you go to see famous people perform. It's not really where you go to hang out with your friends. What Trash is doing is we're really building like the evolution of stories. And by stories, I mean like Snapchat and Instagram stories, like a way to share your mood in video, the feeling you have, the thing you want to share, like very quickly. It's not necessarily that like entertainment content that might go viral with a large fan base. It's something that the people who care about you are probably going to be more interested in watching. And so that's another reason why we're very aligned with Snapchat, because they have a similar philosophy.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks, Hannah. And just to follow up on a couple of other questions, because people have been interested in funding for your startups as well. Did you want to talk about app specific, Trash specifically, or maybe a general comment about what it's like in LA to raise funding, which obviously is a much more mature ecosystem than it is over in Australia, would you say?
Yeah, sure. So I've done a lot of different things. I've raised VC money, I've bootstrapped, I've like worked and like brought in money working at a company at the same time while I started my startup. So I've like seen it many different ways. I think that it really depends on what. And we've also applied for a lot of grants. So for Trash, we've also raised money for our science through the National Science Foundation here in the United States, which thankfully is around to do that. So I've done a lot of different funding models, and I think the best advice I have on this is it really depends on what you're trying to build and what you want the outcome to be. If you're trying to build something that needs a lot of capital to build some kind of like 10x return, then you need to go the VC route probably. If you're not trying to do that, like maybe you're trying to make just like an honest business that's going to like turn a really nice profit every year, the like less you dilute yourself, the better. And so if you can bootstrap that thing, that's great. Like if you're working in science, then grants might be a good option. So I think I always tell founders, really think about what you want your lifestyle to be, like what you're trying to build with your business, like what you're ready to like strap in for too. Like I've seen a lot of people ruin honestly like really great businesses because they took VC capital and then they were expected to have some kind of like huge exit. So I think it depends. And then I think if you do want to raise VC money, like it just pays to go to the place where all of it is. And so that's one of the reasons I wound up in the West Coast. And so like a lot of our investors are in the Bay Area and San Francisco. I spend a lot of time there. I prefer living in Southern California, but it's just like a short flight away. So yeah, that's my answer.
Thanks, Anna. That's great. Ivy, there's a question for you again from Anonymous. So I'll take it for them. They've asked about how do you get your customers basically. It sounds like you do a lot of networking. Do you have any advice for them about how you get your leads and how you turn them into customers for your business?
Start with a very good product is my advice, because your product will be the ambassador for you. People, at least in my industry, people will not even talk to you unless you have something ahead of you telling them how good you are, how professional you are. So I can't speak for other industries, but if you're working in media, there is known to artists the catch-22 when you have to have a body of work before you get noticed, but you also need funding for that body of work. Stay still, folks. I'm trying to solve that problem. So part of the mechanisms that our software provides is a way for unknown people to get a good representation of their product out there for others to peruse, and so that they can network more easily within the industry. So again, this is specific to me because it is a very closed B2B industry. My general advice for networking in terms of other industries getting clients is to just know your target. That's number one. You have to know who you're targeting. You have to know how their brain thinks, so that when you approach them, it's an instant connection. They trust you. They think that you will give them everything that they've ever dreamed of. And then once you get the project, just make sure that you fulfill those promises that you made.
Thanks, Ivy. That's great. That's great. Bit of emotional EQ required by the sound of it. There's a really interesting question here for you, Gemma, and then I might go to the one that's sort of probably applicable to the whole group. But if David is still here, David Mast, I might throw to you to ask your question of Gemma. It might be. I'll just mute you for a second. Oh no, have you got that under control there, David? Great. You might be on mute now. No, there we go. It's a bit. That looks like a feedback. That looks like a bit of a feedback loop. But look, I'll ask the question for you, David. I'll ask the question for you, no problem. And it looks like you're joining us from Singapore. That's awesome. Thanks for that. So the question, Gemma, was David's wife is currently working with younger kids who have autism. Have your tools been discussed with occupational therapists working in that space at all?
It's an interesting one, because when we launched, we first did it at a festival, and they said, how does this go with kids who are on the spectrum or with disability? And we're like, no idea, let's have a go. So we got really great feedback from parents with kids on the spectrum, and we've had some very preliminary conversations with physios and medical professionals in that space, but it hadn't really gone anywhere. It's something that we're really interested in having that conversation, particularly given the anecdotal feedback from parents, but we haven't kind of dived into it. So like really up for leads of people that it would be worth having the conversation with around that stuff.
Thanks, Gemma. That's great. So look, I might ask this, unless an absolute dynamite one comes in the next few minutes, I might ask this question to the whole panel, and they can all sort of give a bit of an answer to this, and then I might throw back to Sophie and to wrap this up. But panel, maybe also think about, we generally, say people can try and connect via LinkedIn and these sort of things, and obviously download your products and all of that. If you have any sort of final sort of thoughts around that. But this is the last question from the Slido, and then we'll go back to Sophie. So it's a question about finding co-founders. So it's saying, how do you find your co-founders? How do you identify them, or perhaps even your team more generally? And how do you inspire and engage them? Do you share equity? What do you offer them to make them really excited to work for you? And so we might go to Hannah first, then Ivy, and then Gemma, please.
Sure. I mean, definitely equity is important and salary is important and a good job position is important. But I think really the thing that always works with people is being aligned with the vision and being able to sell what you are trying to make, and have somebody fall in love with that idea and want to make it with you.
Wonderful, thanks, Hannah. So I'll go to Ivy with about the same question. So co-founders, recruiting for your team, what's important to you?
I echo Hannah, and that the most important thing, especially when you're a startup and you can't offer anybody a lot of money, and most people really don't want to work for equity, is that they have to have a very clear vision of what your company is and what it stands for, because then the people who have the same set of values will gravitate to you, and then it's just trying to find the people who have the skill set that you need.
Awesome. lovely succinct answers. Thanks, everyone. And Gemma, I'll throw to you to finish on that one about your co-founders. I mean, obviously working with your sister is an interesting interesting one. But yeah, has the team expanded beyond that?
Well, we've brought on our developer as a co-founder, and like it's a really difficult challenge, because essentially it's like being in a relationship with someone, you know, you're going to be working a lot. You have to get on with them and trust them. And so it's also about not necessarily rushing in. And, you know, I'm more of a cautious person around that stuff. So like really getting to know someone, and just being fair and like making sure that, you know, people are getting what they need. They're getting either a wage, or you're allowing them the space where they're earning from their other job, and just having an understanding about what resources you have available, but also just being honest and fair about how equity is split, or how much time people are investing, and just where they're at, to make sure that everyone feels like they're being heard and supported to participate in creating the grander vision.
Thanks. That's great. That's great. So, Sophie, I might hand back to you to round up. And I don't know whether you have a final question for the panelists, or whether you'd like to summarize, or just say thanks for being here, and then we might, you know, give the plugs to Velocity and all the rest of it. But I just thought I'd throw back to you, Sophie, to wrap it up, if you don't mind.
Yeah, thank you, Tim, and thank you everybody for those fantastic responses and questions. I think what I would probably leave is a few observations, and I think the thing that I find particularly inspiring from today is the lack of hype. Everybody has spoken from such a humble and personal perspective that is extremely distinctive and relates exactly to, I see very clearly the connection of the person and the product. And I think those words that were coming up around vision and values is very motivating. You've all started as artists, and you haven't left that behind. You've brought with you all the way through all these very complex gates and barriers and challenges that you've been through, where you're in a world of acquisition and finance and seed rounds and all of these things that are new, a real adherence to that integrity. And I think that's something that I've particularly taken away from today's talks. Those journeys are all very distinctive. You've all coming from very different beginnings and in different environments, in different sectors. But I think that commitment to your product first and foremost, and the way that you've applied hard work and great ethics to that, it's very clear that the success comes from that, from having that really strong personal starting point. So I take my hat off to you all. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. The detail, the nuts and bolts, but also the philosophy was really inspiring today. And I think there's a great deal more to discover. As I said earlier, I think digging into those, getting to know Trash and Sleigh and AudioPlay will be really rewarding for everybody here today, but also digging deeper into the backgrounds of women we've been speaking to. So yeah, that's my summary. I think it's I'm sure you've got more questions, and that there'll be an opportunity to watch the video and to sort of revisit some of the things that we've learned today in detail. But yeah, thank you, Tim. Thank you, speakers. Thank you, Abina. That's all from me.
Thanks, Sophie. Well, I certainly can't do a better job at summing it up than that. So I'll certainly leave it there, and just say that, and a big thank you to Sophie as well, of course, who's done a lot of work behind the scenes and an incredible sort of framing up of this event before today, which we were all very impressed with. So thanks again. And I've just put a couple of last notes in the chat there about our Ask Me Anything session tomorrow, where you can sign up on the website as well if you want to learn more about Velocity. Obviously, check out AudioPlay, Sleigh, and Trash App. And obviously, we've got about 2 more weeks for Velocity, which we'd love to see some applications from people here. We'd love to get some creative tech. And, you know, the City of Melbourne is even sponsoring a couple of those spots for music startups as well. So thanks for sticking around, everybody. Thanks for your engagement. I've never seen a chat panel like this. It's crazy. There is hundreds of messages there. So that's really exciting to see. So thank you for that. And thank you to our guests. So that's probably all from us. I'm going to wave goodbye and see you all next time. So thanks, Ivy, Sophie, Gemma, and Hannah. Thanks again.